The CEO, the ex-wife, and the shocking truth. Action required. If you believe in second chances and secrets that change everything, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the ultimate reveal. What if, months after a devastating divorce, you stumbled upon your ex-wife holding a baby? That's precisely what happened to Marcus Thorne, a powerful CEO who thought he had finally left his past behind. But the moment he saw his ex, Isabel Ray, again, a terrifying doubt began to consume him. Could that child be his son? This is a story of unexpected reunions, carefully guarded secrets, and choices that can forever alter destinies. Stay with me until the very end, because the truth about to be revealed will shatter everything you think you know. Drop a like if you're ready for the drama. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Marcus? Demand answers or walk away? Part 1. A fissure in a controlled world. The morning sky over Manhattan was a grim gray, and the reflection of the glass skyscrapers created a somber yet impeccably organized backdrop, much like the life of Marcus Thorne. He strode with confident steps across the marble lobby of Thorne Industries, his face serious, his bespoke suit flawless, as if nothing could ever shake his meticulously planned routine. To all who watched him, Marcus was the personification of success, the ruthless CEO, respected, feared, and always in control. Yet behind that imposing image lay an emptiness he preferred to ignore, the silence of a house devoid of laughter and warmth since the day Isabel walked out the door, taking not just her luggage, but a part of him that never returned. Months had passed since the divorce. On paper, it was resolved. In his soul, however, it was an open wound. Marcus plunged into work, believing that multi-million-dollar contracts and corporate conquests would be enough to fill the void, until destiny, as whimsical as always, decided to flip his life upside down in a single, paralyzing instant. He was rushing out of the building for a meeting when he saw her, Isabel. His heart stopped for a second, and all the city noises, the honking, the footsteps, the hurried voices, vanished. She was there, just meters away, her hair loose in waves, her face serene, yet her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. But it wasn't just her that froze him. Clutched in her arms, wrapped in a light blanket, was a baby of about 8 months, with rosy cheeks and large eyes that shone like a cruel mirror of Marcus himself in his childhood photos. The impact was so devastating that he nearly lost his footing. His mind, accustomed to solving complex business equations, was now incapable of processing the obvious. Isabel was holding a child, and that child might be his. The air left his lungs, yet he managed to articulate a sound. His voice choked. "Isabel, what is this?" She tightened her grip on the baby, as if instinctively trying to shield him from Marcus's piercing gaze. The boy whimpered softly, and Marcus's heart lurched. It was impossible not to notice the familiar features, the delicate nose, the line of the chin. Everything about the infant screamed a disturbing resemblance. "This is neither the time nor the place, Marcus," Isabel replied, firm, yet her voice trembling. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on the baby. "Whose child is this?" His tone was more one of desperation than accusation, but Isabel seemed unmoved. She looked away, holding steady. "I don't owe you any explanations." The words were a direct hit. Marcus, who never accepted no in a negotiation, now found himself powerless before the woman who knew his every weakness. The need for answers burned inside him. "Don't run from me again, Isabel," he insisted, his voice now lower, more charged with urgency. "I need to know." She looked at him for a brief second, and in that gaze, he saw everything. Resentment, memories, stifled love, still open wounds. Then, she turned and started to walk away quickly, melting into the crowd as the baby nestled in her arms. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, motionless, his heart in pieces. The CEO everyone viewed as unbeatable was now lost, unable even to breathe properly. The scene he had just witnessed wasn't just a reunion. It was a fissure in the world he thought he had under control. Back in his car, with the city blurring past the window, Marcus closed his eyes and leaned his head against the seat. The image of Isabel with the baby wouldn't leave his mind. Memories began to surface mercilessly, the nights they had loved fiercely, the promises exchanged early in their marriage, and in contrast, the screams, the arguments, the coldness that led to their separation. He had always believed the divorce was final, that it was for the best. But now, with a single glimpse, the past rushed back, demanding answers that could no longer be ignored. When he finally arrived home, Marcus understood the scale of his emptiness. The enormous apartment seemed even larger that night, every corner echoing his solitude. He tried to convince himself that he could move on, that perhaps that baby wasn't his. But deep down, he knew the truth that burned within him. There was a real chance that it was his son, and that chance was enough to make him realize that, for the first time in a long time, no report, contract, or meeting could silence the rising turmoil inside him. The reunion didn't just reopen wounds. It planted a doubt that would change everything. Marcus Thorne, the man who always believed he owned his own destiny, had just discovered that he was at the mercy of a truth that could collapse his entire life. Part 2. The Ghost of the Past. Night fell over the city, but Marcus couldn't escape the scene that had haunted him since morning. Isabel, with a baby in her arms. Eli, as he heard a woman call him when she passed by on the street, was an image that pursued him like a ghost. No matter how many times he tried to concentrate on reports, contracts, or the investors' meeting he had embarrassingly abandoned, everything felt like distant noise. The man who always resolved million-dollar dilemmas with icy composure now felt incapable of solving the simplest, most painful question. Was that boy his son? In his luxurious penthouse, surrounded by silence and glass walls that reflected the glow of the city lights, Marcus poured a glass of whiskey. The golden liquid slid into the crystal glass, but even the liquor, which had so often worked as an anesthetic, couldn't quell the turmoil. Leaning back in his leather armchair, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to be dragged into the vortex of memories he had so carefully avoided. He went back to the beginning. The first time he met Isabel, when they were still young, and she was working as a junior architect for one of the firms that serviced Thorne Holdings. He remembered the enthusiasm in her eyes, the way she defended projects with passion, even in front of older executives. That was what attracted him. Her courage, her authenticity, the way she seemed to see in him more than just the rising businessman. When they started dating, he discovered a sweet Isabel, full of simple yet grand dreams. She spoke of building a home with a garden, filling the walls with laughter, having children running down the halls. He, too pragmatic, would simply smile and say, "One day." Over time, that one day was perpetually postponed. The company grew rapidly. Business demanded more and more of him, and Marcus plunged into endless meetings, international travel, and strategic dinners. Isabel tried to understand, but the absence became unbearable. He remembered the arguments. She complained about the loneliness, the lack of time, the distance that grew even when they were in the same room. He, proud, countered that he was doing it all for them, for the comfortable life they had. The last fight was still crystal clear in his mind. He remembered Isabel standing in the living room, her eyes welling up, saying she couldn't bear living with a man who was always present for the world, but absent for her. He responded with coldness, hiding his fear behind cutting words. "Perhaps it's better if we go our separate ways." And when she didn't contest, just let a tear roll and walked away, He took it as a silent agreement. Days later, the divorce was finalized, and Marcus buried himself in work, as if he could smother the past under piles of reports. Now, with the image of Isabel holding Eli, everything made cruel sense. What if she had tried to say she was pregnant that night? What if her tears weren't just for the end of the marriage, but for the beginning of a life he never knew existed? Regret hit him like a devastating wave. That night, insomnia was his only companion. He paced the living room, his bare feet touching the cold floor while the city slept. In every shadow reflected in the glass, he saw Isabel's silhouette. In every silence, he heard the baby's cry. When the sun began to rise, painting the horizon gold, Marcus realized he couldn't run anymore. He had to face the past head-on, no matter how painful. He decided to seek information. He called a trusted contact, a discreet investigator he usually hired for delicate matters. In a few hours, he had a report in his hands. Isabel was living in a simple apartment in a distant neighborhood. No luxury, no ostentation. Her life had drastically changed since the divorce. Reading the address, Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest. He never imagined Isabel living that way, far from the security and comfort he always believed he had provided. He closed the report forcefully, his eyes flashing with a mix of pain and determination. No matter the cost, no matter how many walls she raised against him, Marcus needed to look into Isabel's eyes and hear the truth from her mouth. He couldn't rest until he knew who that boy was. And deep down, something told him it wasn't just paternity at stake. It was also the chance, perhaps the last one, to repair the mistakes that destroyed the love of his life. Part 3. The Knock and the Confrontation. The decision solidified within him with an inevitable weight. Marcus was not a man to hesitate. In corporate life, his motto had always been to act quickly and firmly, leaving no room for uncertainty. But facing Isabel and that baby, his determination took on a completely new dimension. This wasn't about closing a contract or winning a negotiation. It was about facing his own past, tearing out answers that could change the course of his life. The next afternoon, Marcus found himself in front of the modest building where Isabel lived. The simple facade, the rusted iron gate, the absence of security at the entrance. Everything contrasted with the luxuries he was accustomed to. The man who usually moved in penthouses and five-star hotels was now standing on an ordinary sidewalk, feeling his heart race as it hadn't in years. He took a deep breath, adjusted his suit, and climbed the steps to the door. When Isabel opened it, the surprise was immediate. Her eyes widened for an instant, but quickly narrowed with caution. The baby, Eli, was in her arms, his tiny eyes alert, as if sensing the tension between the adults. "Marcus?" she murmured suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to talk to you," she sighed, clearly torn between sending him away and letting him in. The baby whined, moving in her arms. It was that detail, perhaps, that made her reluctantly step aside. Marcus walked in and was immediately enveloped by the soft scent of milk and lavender that permeated the apartment. The atmosphere was simple but welcoming. Toys scattered on the rug, a colorful blanket on the couch. Small details that revealed a life dedicated to the child. Marcus felt a pang in his chest. For years, he believed he was offering Isabel the best of everything. Trips, expensive gifts, comfort. Now, seeing her in that modest home, he realized that perhaps all she ever wanted was exactly this: simplicity, presence, family. Isabel faced him, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. Marcus approached slowly, his eyes inevitably resting on Eli. The boy stared back with curiosity, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same firm gaze, the same shape of the chin. Marcus hesitantly extended his hand, but didn't touch him. He just whispered, He's beautiful. Isabel hardened her expression. That doesn't give you the right to show up here as if nothing happened. Marcus turned his gaze back to her. I didn't come here to pretend nothing happened. I came because I need answers. Isabel, is this boy my son? She pressed her lips together, holding back the emotion that threatened to overflow. You lost the right to ask questions when you decided to leave me alone, Marcus. His words came out in a breath, almost begging. I made a mistake, I know, but I can't pretend I didn't see him. I can't live in this doubt. I need to know. Isabel walked to the couch and sat down with Eli in her lap. The boy began to play with his mother's fingers, oblivious to the weight of the words hanging in the air. She took a deep breath, facing her ex-husband. I got pregnant shortly after you left, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let you walk into his life as if you've always been here. Marcus felt his heart pound. It wasn't a direct confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. It was as if she had handed him a half-truth, waiting to see how he would react. He knelt down in front of the couch, getting to her level, and spoke with more gentleness than he intended. I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to be present. I want the chance to know my son. She looked up, her eyes misty, but maintained her resolve. It won't be that simple. You've always known how to talk beautifully, Marcus. But what destroyed me wasn't your words. It was your absences. I won't allow Eli to go through the same thing. Marcus closed his eyes for an instant, feeling the weight of guilt crush him. When he opened them, there was a new determination in his expression. Then test me, Isabel. Put me through the ringer. Let me show you that I'm not that man blinded by work anymore. She observed him in silence. Behind the resistance, there was emotion in her gaze. The truth was, Isabel still loved him, despite everything. But love didn't equate to trust. The baby, as if sensing the heavy atmosphere, began to fuss. Marcus tentatively held out his arms, asking for permission to hold him. Isabel hesitated, but finally gave in. When Eli nestled into his arms, the crying stopped almost immediately. Marcus looked at the boy, and a knot tightened in his throat. He looks like me, he said, almost in a whisper. Isabel looked away, trying to hold back her tears. That means nothing. Marcus looked at her firmly. To me, it means everything. In that instant, an invisible thread connected the three of them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. A fragile, unstable, but real beginning. Marcus knew he still had many barriers to face, but for the first time in months, he felt he had a chance, and he was willing to fight for it. Part 4. The Unyielding Walls. The reunion at Isabel's house hadn't left Marcus's mind. For the first time in a long time, he had felt the weight of a responsibility that went far beyond spreadsheets and corporate decisions. Little Eli's gaze, curious and innocent, was now etched into his memory like an invisible tattoo. It was as if the child had branded him with a mark impossible to ignore. 2 days later, Marcus returned. Isabel was reluctant to open the door, but conceded. The air inside the apartment was infused with a soft smell of baby powder. The baby was sleeping in the portable crib next to the couch, breathing peacefully, oblivious to the tension that filled the room. I thought it was clear I don't want you here, Marcus, she said, as soon as he entered, her arms crossed and her expression firm. He took a deep breath, trying to control his tone. Isabel, I can't live in doubt. I need to understand. You know what this boy means to me, or what he could mean. She narrowed her eyes, wounded. And I don't know what it means to you, Marcus. That's what frightens me. Silence settled. Marcus looked at the crib, and then turned back to her. Tell me the truth. Is he my son? Isabel sighed, running her hands through her hair. Her eyes shimmered with restrained tears. I got pregnant right after our divorce, but that changes nothing. He stared, confused. Changes nothing? How does that change nothing, Isabel? That changes everything. She raised her voice for the first time that night. Changes what, Marcus? Will it change the fact that you weren't there when I found out I was pregnant? Will it erase all the nights I cried alone, scared, not knowing how to move forward? Marcus felt his stomach drop. Her words were daggers, and each one hit with surgical precision. He approached, lowering his tone. I didn't know, Isabel. If I had known, I would have stayed. I would have stayed. She cut him off, laughing bitterly. No, Marcus. You would have called me dramatic. You would have said you were too busy to deal with it. That's how it was the whole time, remember? He lowered his eyes, ashamed. The truth was, he had no argument. The image of himself working late, ignoring calls, canceling dinners, came back like a punch to the gut. I know I failed, he muttered, his voice hoarse. But I can't change the past. I can only change the present. Isabel fell silent, walked to the crib, and gently stroked the sleeping baby's cheek. For a few seconds, she seemed lost in thought. When she turned around again, there was a silent pain in her eyes. Marcus, I don't want Eli to grow up tied to promises. I won't let him depend on a man who says one thing and does another. He moved closer, his voice charged with emotion. Then test me, Isabel. Not with words. Test me with actions. She took a deep breath, studying him. The Marcus standing before her seemed different from the man she had left months ago. He was still the same in posture, in the firm tone of his voice, but there was something in his eyes, vulnerability, perhaps even sincere regret. Still, fear was stronger. You don't understand, she said, her voice strained. I built walls to protect my son, to protect myself. I can't just tear everything down because you've decided to show up. Marcus felt tears burn his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Then tell me what I need to do to deserve this chance. She turned away, avoiding his gaze. This isn't something you can decide with effort or money. It's about trust. And trust, Marcus, is built over time. Her words hung in the air like a sentence. He nodded slowly, understanding there would be no shortcuts. But inside him, the flame of determination burned brighter. He was willing to face every barrier, every test, every sleepless night if necessary. Before leaving, he approached the crib one last time. He watched Eli sleep, his face serene, and a knot tightened in his throat. He gently kissed the boy's tiny hand and murmured, almost as a promise to himself, I will be here, son, even if your mother doesn't believe in me now. I will be here. Isabel heard him but didn't reply. She just watched silently, her heart divided between resentment and hope. Marcus left that night with more doubts than answers, but also with an unwavering conviction. He wouldn't let the past dictate the future. If there was a path back, even if narrow and full of thorns, he was willing to walk it. Part 5. Crisis and paternity swapped. The tension between Marcus and Isabel remained a dense cloud, but destiny once again decided to intervene. A few days after the harsh conversation where Isabel made it clear that trust wasn't rebuilt with words, Marcus's phone rang. He was in a board meeting, surrounded by screens, spreadsheets, and the watchful eyes of executives expecting quick decisions. But upon seeing her name flash on the screen, his heart raced. Isabel never called him. He answered immediately, his voice firm, masking his anxiety. Isabel, on the other end, her voice was shaky. Distressed. It's Eli, Marcus. He has a high fever. I don't know what to do. I'm heading to the hospital. The world stopped. Without thinking, Marcus rose from his chair, ignoring the protests and confused looks of the partners. Send me the address. I'm on my way. And he hung up. His driver sped through the congested streets. But for Marcus, every second felt like an eternity. His hands were sweating, and he wondered how it was possible to feel so much fear for someone he barely knew, or knew deeply, because deep down he already felt that boy was part of him, even without written confirmation. In the children's emergency room, he found Isabel sitting on a plastic chair, the baby in her arms. Little Eli was crying, his face red, his breathing labored, his eyes tear-filled. Marcus's chest tightened as never before. He rushed to them, kneeling in front of Isabel. "Give him to me," he asked, almost breathless. Isabel hesitated, but desperation was stronger than pride. She handed Eli over, and Marcus received him gently, cradling him against his chest. Surprisingly, the crying began to subside. The baby calmed, snuggling into his arms, as if recognizing something familiar in that embrace. Marcus felt his heart tremble, and tears that he would never allow to fall in public threatened to escape. "It's okay, son. Daddy is here," he murmured, without even realizing he had used the word Isabel avoided. Daddy. She watched him in silence, her heart divided. Part of her wanted to repel that gesture, remembering the nights she had been alone. But another part couldn't ignore the naturalness with which Eli nestled in his father's arms. The doctor attended to them shortly after. Following tests, he explained that it was a common virus, but the fever required monitoring. Isabel sighed in relief, and so did Marcus, though he was still trembling inside. They left the hospital together late into the night, the cool pre-dawn air enveloping them. "Thank you for coming," Isabel said quietly, almost against her own will. Marcus looked at her, his eyes still tinged with yellow light. "Don't thank me. I should have been here from the beginning." In the car, Eli slept in Isabel's lap, and Marcus couldn't take his eyes off them. The scene seemed so simple, yet it was more precious than any corporate conquest. He, who had always believed that success was measured in numbers, began to realize that perhaps he had been wrong all along. When they arrived at her building, he insisted on helping her upstairs. Once in the apartment, while she gently placed the baby in the crib, Marcus remained watching, silent, with a strange sensation in his chest, as if he were looking at what he had always wanted, but never knew how to name. When Isabel turned around, he was still there, standing, hands in his pockets. "You don't need to stay," she said in a neutral tone. "I know how to handle this alone now." He took a deep breath. "I know you do, but I don't want you to have to handle it alone ever and ever again." Isabel swallowed hard. She didn't answer. She just ran a hand through her hair and sighed. The silence that followed wasn't heavy as before. It was almost comfortable. Marcus approached the crib, leaned over, and gently stroked Eli's tiny hand. The boy stirred, but didn't wake up. Marcus smiled in a way he hadn't in a long time. He turned to Isabel, and his voice heavy with emotion said, "He needs me, but you do too." She stared at him, her eyes misty, and for an instant, it seemed she would reply. But she recoiled, closing off again. "Don't confuse things, Marcus. One night doesn't change the past." He nodded. No, it doesn't. But it can change the future." Isabel looked away. But deep down, his words found a place in her heart. Marcus left the apartment that night feeling different. He didn't have her forgiveness yet, nor the certainty that he could rebuild what was lost. But he had taken the first real step. He had been present in a crucial moment. And, most importantly, he had felt the truth in his arms that no test could deny. In that instant, he knew he was willing to face any battle to win back Isabel's trust and the right to be called Daddy by Eli. Part 6. The DNA Demand. The night at the hospital had left deep marks on Marcus. He could still feel little Eli's warmth in his arms, hear the crying that had turned to calm as soon as the baby recognized his embrace, and remember how, instinctively, he had whispered the word, Daddy. For him, that moment had been a revelation. But for Isabel, it was just a moment of need, a temporary relief that didn't change the past. In the following days, Marcus tried to stay close. He showed up with bags of groceries, helped carry the stroller, and stood ready whenever Isabel needed something. But although she accepted the help, she maintained a wall between them. The glances they exchanged were full of lingering hurt, and even when there was tenderness in her gestures, a distance stubbornly remained. And it was in this gap, this space between what he felt and what he knew, that the decision that would change everything was born. Marcus could no longer live in doubt. Every smile from Eli, every resemblance he saw, every time the boy nestled in his arms, everything pointed to a blatant truth. But what if he was wrong? What if, deep down, that bond was just a desperate projection of a regretful man? One afternoon, the confrontation became inevitable. Isabel was preparing the baby bottle when Marcus walked into the kitchen. His look was different, determined, somber, almost cold. She immediately sensed that something was about to happen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. She looked up. "Peppers." "It's weird, talked about what?" Marcus took a deep breath, like a man preparing for a fall. "About Eli. I need a DNA test." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabel stopped, the bottle still in her hands, and stared at him with disbelief. "You are asking me what?" "Me." He held her gaze, even as he felt his heart tearing apart. "I need to be sure. I can't keep living with this doubt, Isabel. I can't commit myself to him without knowing with absolute clarity that he is my son." She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was bitter, wounded. "You need a piece of paper to believe what is right in front of your eyes. You need a lab report to trust me." Marcus approached, his voice choked. "It's not that. It's not about trusting or not trusting. It's about me not surviving the possibility of being wrong. If I give myself over to this boy and then discover he's not my son, His voice failed, and he swallowed hard. "I couldn't bear it." Isabel dropped the bottle onto the counter with a loud clatter, tears welling in her eyes. "You have no idea what you're saying, Marcus. I spent months alone, facing every fear, every sleepless night. And now, when you finally have the chance to be here, all you can give me is suspicion." He took one step closer, his eyes moist. "I messed up, Isabel. I know I wasn't here when you needed me most. But if I don't take this test, I'll continue to be the same man who fails, who can't handle the truth. I need this. I need to look at that result and know it's not my mind deceiving me." She turned her back, crying silently. The sound of her ragged breathing cut through Marcus more deeply than any words. After a few seconds, Isabel took a deep breath and replied, her voice broken. "If that's what you need, then let's do the test. But know that for me, this isn't just a DNA test. It's a test of trust, and you've already entered this trial losing." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the sting of those words, but he didn't back down. He knew that without that step, he would never have peace. In the days that followed, the wait for the result became torture. Marcus spent sleepless nights, sitting in his armchair, reliving every detail of the past. Isabel's first laughter, the plans they made together, the night of the separation when she wanted to say something, and he, proud, simply walked out, slamming the door. Now, that detail haunted him like a ghost. What if she had tried to tell him about the pregnancy that night? What if everything had been different, if he had just stopped to listen? Isabel suffered in silence, too. She fed Eli and cared for him, but there was a hole in her chest. She loved Marcus despite everything, but she couldn't forgive his need for proof. Every time she looked at her son, she felt the weight of being divided between protecting the child and, at the same time, desperately wishing his father was truly there. The envelope finally arrived. A simple piece of paper, folded and sealed, but carrying the power to unite or destroy what was left of them. Marcus received it, his heart pounding, his legs heavy. He knew that by opening that envelope, there would be no turning back. The result would define not only his relationship with Eli, but also with Isabel, and perhaps even his own future. He took a deep breath, looking at the envelope as if it were an enemy, and when he looked up at Isabel, he saw the same fear reflected in her. The confrontation was far from over. In fact, it was just about to explode. Part 7. The Result and the Reckoning. The envelope lay on the coffee table of the small apartment, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Marcus and Isabel were there, face to face, but it was as if an abyss separated them. The silence was so dense, one could hear the rhythmic breathing of Eli, sleeping in the next room. It was curious. The baby slept peacefully, while the two adults who should guide him were drowning in uncertainty. Marcus kept his hands on his knees, his fingers trembling despite his rigid posture. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so afraid. In the most difficult negotiations of his career, even in the face of figures that could sink his company, he had never wavered so much. But there, before a folded piece of paper, he felt the weight of his entire past, every wrong choice, and every cowardly silence. Isabel, in turn, stood with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on a random spot on the floor. Her breathing was heavy, her jaw tight. The test wasn't just about Eli's paternity. For her, it was proof that Marcus didn't believe her word, that the man who had so often promised to be by her side still needed evidence to trust her. "Are you going to open it, or let this kill us from the inside out?" Her voice broke the silence, firm yet strained. Marcus reached out his hand. The paper seemed to weigh tons when he picked it up. He carefully tore the edge, almost in slow motion, as his heart hammered. His eyes scanned the technical lines, the codes, until they stopped at the final sentence, highlighted in bold. Probability of paternity, 99.9. He swallowed hard, his eyes welling up. The weight he carried in his chest gave way to an overwhelming wave of emotion. Marcus looked up at Isabel, and his voice came out in a broken whisper. "He's my son, Isabel. Eli is my son." Isabel took a deep breath, the tears she had tried so hard to hold back finally streaming down her face. "I never lied to you, Marcus. Never." The words hit him square on. Shame burned within. He closed his eyes, and a single tear escaped. "I know, and I can't change the fact that I didn't believe you. But now that I know the truth, I swear I won't lose another day of his life." He stood up and walked to the bedroom. Isabel didn't stop him. Marcus approached the crib and stood watching his son sleep. The boy's cheeks were rosy, his fists clenched in small gestures of strength. Marcus gently extended his hand and touched Eli's tiny fingers. The baby stirred and instinctively gripped his finger. Marcus felt his heart shatter and rebuild at the same time. "I will be here, son." The words came out like a promise sealed by his own blood. "I'll be here." When he returned to the living room, he found Isabel standing, leaning against the wall, tears still falling. He approached her hesitantly and stopped in front of her. "I am sorry, not just for doubting you, but for everything. For not being there when you needed me most." She stared at him, her eyes misty and full of pain. "You have no idea what it was like to go through everything alone, Marcus. Discovering the pregnancy, being afraid, giving birth, sleepless nights, and not having you by my side. I don't know if I can forgive that." He took a deep breath, feeling his throat tighten. "I don't expect you to forgive me now, but give me the chance to show you that I've learned. Let me be by your side, not as the man who failed, but as the father Eli deserves." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle sound of the wind against the window. Isabel looked away, fighting the contradictory feelings that tore her apart. There was still resentment, still fear, but there was also love. Love that had never died, only been suffocated by pride and pain. She took a deep breath, turning her eyes back to him. "I don't know if I can trust you, Marcus, but I won't stop you from being in his life. Eli has the right to know his father." It was a partial surrender, but for Marcus, it was like hearing a sentence of hope. He met it with a fragile but genuine smile. "That's all I need. I'll conquer the rest, day by day." Isabel wiped away her tears, exhausted. "I hope this time you are telling the truth." Marcus took a step forward and, carefully, touched her hand. She didn't pull it away. It was a minimal gesture, but for both of them, it represented something immense. At that moment, there was no complete forgiveness, no full reconciliation, but there was an undeniable truth. They were linked forever by that boy, and for the first time, Marcus felt he had a new chance, not just to be a father, but perhaps to win back the love he had lost. And he wouldn't let that chance slip away. Part 8. Redemption. One step at a time. The test result had put an end to the doubt, but not the abyss that still separated Marcus and Isabel. Now he knew, with absolute certainty, that Eli was his son. The paper confirmed what his heart already screamed, but it also highlighted another problem, the past that still weighed heavily between them. Isabel wasn't ready to give him her full trust, and he understood that. For the first time in years, Marcus realized that there was no point in seeking shortcuts. If he wanted his family back, he would have to rebuild, stone by stone, what he himself had destroyed. And so he began to prove himself, not with speeches, but with actions. Initially, Isabel was suspicious of his every move, believing he would tire of it sooner or later. But Marcus surprised her. He showed up early one morning with bags full of fresh fruit, diapers, and toys. The first bath he tried to give Eli resulted in him soaking his expensive shirt, spilling half the water on the floor, and making his son cry in alarm. Isabel almost laughed at the sight, but restrained herself. Instead of giving up, Marcus tried again, with patience. Gradually, Eli relaxed in his arms, and the crying gave way to gurgles. It was in that moment that Isabel, even without admitting it, felt the wall around her crack slightly. He didn't stop. He spent nights awake beside her, rocking Eli when the baby insisted on crying for no reason. He slept in an uncomfortable armchair just to ensure Isabel wasn't alone. At first, she said, "You don't have to," but soon realized that he wasn't there out of obligation. He was there because he wanted to be, and that was a novelty for her. One late afternoon marked the change even more significantly. They were at the park after a difficult week, and Marcus was chasing Eli, who was already attempting to crawl on the grass. Isabel watched them from afar, her heart tight. There was tenderness in the way Marcus, the man who once only knew meetings and travel, now threw himself onto the ground, without fear of dirtying his clothes, just to elicit a laugh from his son. When he returned to her, carrying Eli, his face was illuminated by a genuine, almost childlike smile. "He has your courage, Isabel," Marcus said, looking at his son. "But I think he inherited my stubbornness." She laughed. She couldn't help it. And in that laughter, Marcus saw a flicker of the woman he had known years before, the partner who believed in simple dreams. Later, at home, while Eli slept, Marcus approached Isabel. She was sitting on the couch, exhausted, her arms crossed, as she always did when trying to protect herself. He knelt before her, something unthinkable for the proud man he had always been. "I know I can't ask you to forget the past. I can't erase the nights you cried alone, or the fact that I doubted you when you needed my trust most. but I can promise that I won't repeat the same mistakes. I want to be different, Isabel. For you, for our son." She stared at him in silence, her eyes misty. Part of her screamed not to believe him, not to be fooled again. But another part, the one that still loved him, was already beginning to yield. "You always knew how to use pretty words, Marcus. The problem is, they never came accompanied by actions." He smiled faintly, but without irony. "Then look at me now. These aren't words. These are choices. I'm here, and I'm not leaving again." Isabel closed her eyes for an instant, breathing deeply. When she opened them, there was a different light in them, still suspicious, but also full of hope. She didn't say yes. She didn't say, "I forgive you," but she extended her hand and held his. It was a small but powerful gesture. Marcus felt his heart warm as it hadn't in years. That wasn't the end of the battle, but it was the first real victory. That night, as they put Eli in the crib, they stood side by side, watching their son sleep. The silence that enveloped them was no longer one of resentment, but of something approaching peace. Marcus lightly rested his shoulder against hers, and Isabel didn't move away. This was how, between errors and successes, tears and smiles, they began a new chapter. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But for the first time since the divorce, a family was present again. And deep down, both knew. This time, they wouldn't let pride destroy what they still had. Conclusion. A love reborn. Time passed, and with it, the turbulent days of uncertainty gave way to a new routine. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing between Marcus and Isabel would be that simple. But little by little, the wounds began to heal. Isabel's home, once quiet, was now always filled with the sounds of a family's daily life. Eli's laughter, Marcus's firm steps arriving earlier from work, conversations at night that were no longer marked by accusations, but by sharing. On that sunny late afternoon, the living room was full of life. Eli, now nearly 18 months old, was attempting his first real steps. His wobbly legs barely supported him, but he moved forward with open arms, while Marcus, crouched a few feet away, encouraged him. "Come on, champ, just one more step," he said, his eyes shining, his voice choked with emotion. With an almost heroic effort, Eli crossed the short distance and tumbled into his father's arms. Marcus lifted him high, laughing loudly, and the baby giggled, thrilled with his own achievement. Isabel, watching from the kitchen doorway, couldn't hold back her tears. It was a scene that, months ago, she never imagined witnessing. The man who had left her alone was now a constant, committed, transformed presence. Marcus noticed her, and, still holding his son, smiled at her. He did it. Our little man did it. Isabel approached, discreetly wiping her tears. "He got your stubbornness," she replied with an emotional smile. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and in that gaze, there was everything words couldn't translate. Regret, gratitude, and love. Still holding Eli, he moved closer to her. "He wasn't the only one who took the first steps, Isa. I did too." His voice cracked, but he continued. "And I won't stop. Every day, I want to be better for both of you." She looked at him, her eyes misty, and this time, she didn't look away. She extended her hand and touched his face. "I know, Marcus. I see it. And as much as it still hurts to remember, I also know that the man standing before me is no longer the one who left me alone." It was a simple yet powerful moment. There were no grand declarations or empty promises, just the realization that, against all odds, they were starting over. And this time, not as husband and wife trying to sustain an illusion, but as two people who learned from pain and chose to rebuild. Later, as they tucked Eli into bed, They stood side by side watching the boy in the crib. The silence of the room was serene, cradled only by the child's soft breathing. Marcus intertwined his fingers with Isabel's, and she didn't pull away. "You know, Issa," he murmured, "I built empires. I closed multi-million-dollar deals. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to this. To you two." Isabel smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "And all I ever wanted was this from the start, Marcus. Just you being present." He kissed the top of her head, closing his eyes for an instant. Deep down, he knew there would still be challenges, that complete forgiveness would take time. But he also knew that now he had something he didn't possess before, the certainty that he wouldn't face anything alone again. And so, on that quiet night, Marcus Thorne, the CEO everyone judged unbeatable, but who was inside just a broken man, finally found what he had never known to seek: a home, a love reborn, and the silent promise of a future that, for too long, seemed impossible. In the end, Marcus and Isabel understood that true love is not made of perfection, but of daily choices. They had gone through the abyss of separation, the pain of distrust, and the weight of mistakes that nearly destroyed them. Yet despite all the falls, they chose to get up, not just for Eli, but because deep inside them, there was still a flame that, despite everything, never went out. That flame now burned stronger, transformed by maturity, by the courage to start anew, and by the certainty that the past didn't have to define the future. And so, between their son's laughter and the silent glances that spoke more than words, they realized that the home they sought was not a luxurious house or a flawless life. It was the embrace that became a safe harbor. It was the forgiveness that brought peace. It was the presence that replaced any promise. Together, they learned that love is not the absence of falling, but the decision to walk hand in hand, even when the ground seems to crumble. And this time, they were ready to live each day as if it were the first, knowing that their hearts had finally found the place where they always belonged. If you were moved by Marcus and Isabel's story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment "amazing story" below to let me know you're with me. Don't miss our next deep dive into the human heart.